The morning Cassian Bourne realized his head of financial compliance had been quietly breaking for months, she was sitting in the middle of a budget review, wearing a cardigan in the middle of July. Faye Navarro was 31 years old, with the kind of mind that most people at Bourne Capital spent entire careers trying to develop and still fell short of. She'd rebuilt the firm's risk assessment framework from scratch at 28. She'd caught a $4.2 million discrepancy in a Swiss account that 3 senior analysts had walked past without blinking. She could hold 7 simultaneous variables during a hostile acquisition meeting while everyone else was still finding the right page. Sharp, thorough, and precise in a way that felt almost physical, like the air around her ran at a higher resolution than everywhere else. She also wore long sleeves in July, and that morning, when she leaned across the conference table to point out a figure on the projection screen, Cassian saw exactly why. A bruise, dark and deliberate, wrapped around her right wrist like a brand. She caught him looking, pulled her sleeve down without breaking stride, kept talking about the discrepancy in the offshore hedging strategy, voice steady, eyes on the numbers. Cassian didn't say a word. But after the last person filed out of the room, he picked up his phone and made a single call. By noon, he knew everything. That night, her fiancé Heath Langley packed a single bag and did not come back. Faye had worked at Bourne Capital for 4 years, and in that time she had never once been late. She answered emails at midnight. She memorized contract clauses that opposing counsel's entire teams overlooked. She walked into rooms where she was the only woman, often the largest person present, and she dismantled financial positions with a courtesy that made the dismantling somehow worse for the people on the receiving end. They never saw it coming, because they'd already decided, looking at her, that she wasn't the threat in the room. She'd spent a significant portion of her career using that assumption against people. It was one of the few advantages she'd learned to take without guilt. What she could not do, apparently, was hide well enough from a man who had built an empire by noticing the things everyone else chose not to see. That morning she'd taken 3 different subway routes to the office. The habit had developed slowly over the past 8 months, quietly and without her full conscious acknowledgement, until the day she realized she was doing it not for any practical reason, but because unpredictability had come to feel like safety. She wore the cardigan because Heath had grabbed her wrist 2 nights ago when she told him she'd need to work through the weekend. The conversation had started over a notification on her phone, a work calendar alert that had lit up the screen during dinner. And it had gone sideways fast, the way things went sideways now, and ended with Faye sitting on the bathroom tile, cold water running over the bruise, pressing her forehead against the cabinet and telling herself it would level out. He was stressed. The development deal he'd been pitching for 3 months had collapsed. It was just stress. She had been telling herself that story for 2 years. Heath Langley was, by every surface-level measure, exactly the kind of man you were supposed to want. Tall, well-presented, fluent in the kind of dinner-party charm that reads, from a distance, as warmth. He had a finance background, not as deep as Faye's, but enough that in the beginning they'd talked for 4 hours at a work function about portfolio theory, and she'd thought, with a fullness she wasn't used to, here is someone who sees me, an equal, someone who wanted to match her. What she hadn't understood then, what took 2 years to fully surface, was that Heath didn't want an equal. He wanted an audience, a specific kind of audience, one that reflected his image back to him, managed his instability, funded his gaps, and stayed small enough not to eclipse him. The controlling started with food, comments about her portions at restaurants, a new grocery policy, his word policy, about what came into the apartment, then her spending, her schedule, her friendships, then the accounts. 17 transfers over 26 months, each one presented to Faye as a temporary solution, a bridge loan between Heath's ambitions and his results, and each one accepted because she had long since stopped being able to see clearly where her choices ended and his pressure began. Leaving had stopped seeming simple. The apartment was his lease. Her savings were largely gone. He had, on 2 separate occasions, mentioned his SEC contacts in a way that wasn't quite a threat but wasn't quite not one either. Leaving had started to feel, in the distorted arithmetic of a trapped mind, like it would cost more than staying. She pressed her sleeve flat and pulled up the afternoon's numbers. At 4 p.m., Cassian appeared in her doorway. "Close the door," he said. Faye looked up. She had seen Cassian in many modes across 4 years. Strategic, cold, precisely furious occasionally, and surprisingly funny, but the expression he was wearing right now was new. But underneath the control was something that looked, in the low afternoon light, a great deal like grief. She closed the door. "I'm fine, Mr. Bourne." "I didn't ask." "I know what you saw," she said carefully. "I was carrying bags from the farmer's market and the handles." "Faye." His voice was quiet, not soft. Cassian Bourne was not a soft man, but careful in the particular way you were careful with something you didn't want to damage further. "I know the difference between a bag-handle bruise and a grip bruise. I know because I grew up in a house where I had to learn that difference very young." She didn't answer. The backs of her eyes burned. "Is it the man you live with?" She had promised herself every morning for 8 months that she would not cry at work. "It was one time," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He's been under significant pressure. The Tribeca deal fell through and he—" How long? The question was so simple and so enormous that she felt the weight of it physically, a pressure behind her ribs, across her sternum. "It started small," she said finally. "It always started small. Comments about what I ate. Suggestions about how I dressed for work, whether I was making myself too visible. Then the accounts." She paused. "I didn't recognize the pattern from inside it. That's the part I couldn't explain to anyone. I just kept making adjustments, and by the time I understood what I was adjusting to, I was already very far in." Cassian was still, his hands flat on the desk, perfectly quiet. She'd learned that stillness meant he was containing something. "What's his name?" "Please don't," Faye said immediately. "Please, I know what resources you have. If he finds out I said anything, if he thinks I went to someone like you, he has SE contacts. He's mentioned them. And I don't want this to turn into something that follows me professionally. She stopped, pressed her hands flat on her thighs. "I am handling it." "Are you?" She didn't answer. "I want you to leave early today," Cassian said. "Even will drive you. He'll wait while you pack a bag. You will not be going back to that apartment tonight." "Mr. Bourne." "You are the most valuable person in this building," he said, and the flatness in his voice, the complete absence of flattery, just the neutral certainty of someone stating a fact they've already verified, made her throat close unexpectedly. "Not because of your output. Whatever, he's been telling you about who you are and how much space you're allowed to take up. It's not true, and I need you somewhere safe tonight so I can think clearly about next steps." He stood, set a hotel keycard on the desk between them. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag. Heath's apartment was empty when Ivan walked her through the door. The bourbon on the counter was still room temperature. The coat hook by the door was bare. Faye packed efficiently. She had always packed efficiently, and found at the back of her closet shelf the folder she'd been quietly assembling for 11 months. Transfer records, screenshots of certain conversations, printed documentation organized by date in her own name in a folder she had never once mentioned to Heath. She had not known when she started that folder exactly what she was preparing for. She knew now. Ivan drove her to a hotel on the Upper East Side, quiet, expensive, no questions, and handed her a room key and Cassian's direct line written in his own handwriting on a card. She sat on the edge of the bed in the robe the hotel provided and stared at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window for a while. The city looked the same as it always did, enormous and indifferent, and lit up like something that didn't know yet that her life had just changed completely. Her phone buzzed at 9 p.m. From Heath. "Don't bother. I've met someone who actually appreciates what I bring. The engagement's off. Don't make this dramatic." She read it twice. Set the phone down. Waited for the grief to arrive, the familiar crushing weight, the self-recrimination, the long list of ways she had failed to be adequate. What came instead was silence, and underneath the silence, something so foreign it took her a full minute to identify. She could breathe. Not partly, not cautiously, all the way down. There was a knock at the door an hour later. She opened it to find Cassian standing in the hallway, jacket off, holding a bag from the Italian place on Michigan. No, she was in New York now, from Claudette's on the Upper West Side. That she knew cost more per plate than her first month's rent in grad school. "You haven't eaten," he said. It wasn't a question. "I had the crackers from the minibar." He came inside without being invited, set the bag on the writing desk, and began unpacking it with the efficiency of a man who had made decisions and did not intend to revisit them. Handmade pasta, braised lamb, bread that still had warmth in it, a small container of the lemon cream cake that she had mentioned once, 8 months ago in passing, during a working lunch. She had no memory of him being present for that conversation. He remembered. "Sit down," he said. "I really shouldn't. After the day I've had, the last thing I need is—" She stopped, Heath's voice. His particular brand of arithmetic, her plate, her size, the wedding photos, the weight she needed to lose before any of it was allowed. She heard it and recognized it and felt something harden quietly behind her eyes. She sat down. Cassian plated food for her, generous portions, without commentary, and pulled the second chair around and sat across from her. He didn't watch her eat the way Heath watched her eat, calibrating and assessing. He just sat there in the low lamplight and let her take the first bite of something that tasted like care made edible, and when she closed her eyes for a moment at the taste, she heard him exhale slowly, like something in him had also released. They ate. He told her dryly about a Vienna negotiation that had gone sideways because of a mistranslated clause about maritime law. She told him about the Q3 projection she'd been quietly running for 6 weeks that nobody else had asked for yet, but that he was going to need by October. He said, "I know. I was waiting for you to bring it." She said, "How long have you known?" He said, "Since March." She laughed, quietly, genuinely, and the sound of it surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed without calculating whether it was the right kind, the right volume, whether it would be held against her afterward. "Can I say something?" Cassian said. "You're going to anyway. The way you described it in the office, how you kept making adjustments without seeing the pattern." He was looking at her directly, the way he always did. No deflection, no social softening. "That's not a failure of intelligence. You are the sharpest analyst I have ever employed. This was not something you missed because you weren't paying attention. It happened because someone worked very deliberately to change what you were paying attention to. That's what it is. That's the whole mechanism." Faye was quiet. "Your worth," Cassian said, "is not a negotiable figure. It doesn't adjust based on who's in the room or what they want from you. I want you to understand that I have understood that about you since approximately the 2nd month you worked here. Everything else," he gestured, slightly toward the window, toward the general direction of wherever Heath was tonight, "is noise." A tear slid down her face before she could stop it. She let it go. Across town, in the lower level of a parking structure near Hudson Yards, Heath Langley was having a considerably different evening. He'd been collected, quietly, efficiently, by 2 men who materialized beside his car, with the practiced calm of people for whom this was routine, guided to the far corner of the structure where he noticed, with a chill, that the security cameras were all angled slightly wrong. Cassian walked out of the shadows and buttoned his jacket. Mr. Langley, his voice carried in the concrete space. Thank you for your time. I don't know what you think you're doing. I think I'm having a business conversation, Cassian said. That's all this is. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. 26 months, 17 transfers, an LLC registered under a variation of your mother's maiden name. Combined value $214,000, some allocated to the Tribeca development pitch, some to Atlantic City, one memorable purchase of a vintage Patek Philippe. He let that land. She thought she was supporting a partner. What she was doing was funding a liability. Heath's jaw tightened. Those were personal loans, she agreed. There are no signed agreements, no repayment schedules, no documentation of consent. In New York State, what you've described constitutes financial coercion within an intimate partner relationship. That's before we address the physical documentation, which I also have. Cassian's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. I am not law enforcement. I have no interest in a public resolution. What I want is simple and final. He nodded. The document portfolio landed on the hood of the nearest car. Full repayment, $214,000. Automatic deduction from Langley Group's operating account. 18-month schedule. A signed mutual restraining order, which becomes active tonight. No contact with Faye Navarro. No contact with anyone at Bourne Capital. No discussion of this agreement or its terms with your SEC contacts or anyone else. Cassian paused. You will also never, in any context, again position yourself as someone she owes something to. That particular story ends tonight. Heath stared at the portfolio, and if I refuse? Then the complete file, transfers, communications, physical documentation, a 30-page timeline assembled by my legal team, goes to the DA's Financial Crimes Unit tomorrow morning. Your development license gets flagged during the inquiry. The partners considering the Midtown project will have the opportunity to reconsider. And I've been informed that your father's firm carries Bourne paper on 2 existing positions. Cassian straightened his cuffs. I'd prefer not to make this more complicated than it needs to be, but I am entirely prepared to. The parking structure was silent, except for the wind off the river, threading through the concrete levels. Heath signed. 6 months later, New York had moved from grey winter through a slow and reluctant spring, and Faye Navarro had moved with it, not in the dramatic, overnight way of transformation montages, but in the gradual, real way that happens when a pressure you'd forgotten was constant finally lifts and you realize you'd been breathing shallowly for years. She kept her position, took the raise without discussion, found a 1-bedroom in Cobble Hill, small, sunny, entirely her own, and spent a Saturday arranging it exactly as she wanted, which involved an amount of plants that her co-workers would have found surprising, and a standing desk she assembled herself over the course of an afternoon, following instructions she mentally revised as she went. She did not lose any weight. She had not planned to and did not intend to. She bought clothes that fit her actual body, structured blazers, wide-leg trousers in deep jewel tones, a silk wrap dress in burgundy that she wore to the Q2 board presentation, and in which she proceeded to dismantle a competing firm's acquisition model in front of 12 people, all of whom left the room knowing her name. The CFO of a rival firm asked afterward whether she'd consider a lateral move. She said no, but she noted the offer's existence in a way she would not have 12 months ago. What shifted most noticeably, to people paying attention, was the way she occupied space. She stopped pre-qualifying her analysis, stopped opening statements with "I could be wrong, but" or "this might be too conservative." She was not wrong. She was almost never too conservative. She had simply spent 2 years using hedged language as protective coloration, making herself smaller and less visible as a reflexive response to an environment that had trained her to expect that being fully present would cost her. She was done with that particular habit. Cassian noticed. Of course he noticed. Their dynamic had shifted in the way it does when someone has seen you at your most stripped down and chosen, without drama, to stay. Late evenings reviewing the Rotterdam acquisition or the Singapore expansion filing. The silences between them had taken on a quality that was neither professional nor carefully managed, just comfortable, the way genuine familiarity feels when you've stopped performing around someone. She caught him watching her sometimes when she was working. He didn't look away when she caught him. She hadn't said anything, neither had he. It was a Wednesday when Heath stepped out from the awning next to the building's side entrance. Faye had been returning from a meeting with the legal team, moving through the midday foot traffic at her usual pace, when she saw him and felt her body register him, the old animal response, that fast, cold flush, before she'd consciously processed who he was. He looked reduced, the collar slightly off, the shoes not quite right. The easy confidence she'd once mistaken for solidity had thinned to something that looked, in the direct light, like performance. "You're in violation of a court order," she said. "I just want 5 minutes." His hands spread. Reasonable tone. She knew the reasonable tone. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I think there's a version of this that works for everyone. Some of those transfers. My lawyers have a different read on the agreement terms. If Bourne coerced that signature, it's potentially voidable, and then the conversation about what you actually owe me becomes..." "Stop." He blinked. He'd expected something else. The careful deflection, the conciliation, the old reflex toward smoothing things over. "You signed an agreement," Faye said. Her voice was even. Not loud. She didn't need loud. "You have been receiving automatic payments per that agreement. You have no claim. You have no leverage. And you do not have 5 minutes." She looked at him, this man who had spent 2 years convincing her that her size, her appetite, her ambition, her need for space were all problems requiring management. And what she felt was not rage. Rage would have meant he still held weight. What she felt was the clean, uncomplicated recognition of something that had simply never deserved her. "I want you to leave," she said, "right now." The door behind her opened. Cassian stepped onto the sidewalk. 2 men flanked him, quiet and unhurried. He looked at Heath with the particular expression he reserved for figures that didn't add up. "He was leaving," Faye said. "I was," Heath agreed. He straightened his jacket with the last available shred of dignity and turned and walked away without looking back, and Faye watched him go until he rounded the corner and the street was ordinary again. She exhaled. "You didn't need me," Cassian said. "I know." She turned to look at him. "You showed up anyway." "I will always show up," he said, flat and certain and entirely real. The elevator back to the 42nd floor was empty. Somewhere around the 20th floor, Cassian reached past her and pressed the stop button. The elevator went still, suspended between floors, the city visible through the glass panel, enormous, lit, indifferent, beautiful. He turned to face her. She had been waiting, she realized. Not impatiently, not even consciously, but waiting the way you wait for something you've already decided you want once the timing is right. And the timing had been sliding steadily toward right for approximately 6 months. He took her face in his hands, careful and certain in equal measure, and kissed her. Not the tentative, calibrated kind of gesture that could be walked back. Fully committed, the way he did everything, the way she had watched him operate across 4 years and come to trust without reservation. She kissed him back, felt his arms come around her and held on, not delicately, not with the old instinct toward minimizing herself, not with the reflexive need to take up less room. She stood as large as she was, and let herself be held by someone who had never once asked her to be smaller. When they separated, Cassian pressed his forehead to hers, both of them breathing. "I should have said this a long time ago," he said. "So I'm saying it now. I am in love with you, your mind, the way you annotate a balance sheet, your stubbornness during every negotiation I've watched you walk into and win. Every part of you that someone spent 2 years telling you was too much." He pulled back to look at her. "Stay, not as my employee. As my partner, I mean that in every sense." Faye held his gaze. "I need you to understand something first," she said. He waited. "I don't need saving," she said. "I built the folder. I walked out of that apartment on my own. I handled Heath on that sidewalk before you came through the door. What I need," she paused, choosing it carefully, "is someone who sees all of that and shows up anyway. Not to carry me, just to stand next to me." Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, more like the satisfaction of a number confirming what a longer calculation had already implied. "That," Cassian said, "I can do." He released the stop button. The elevator resumed its climb. Faye looked at the city below them, spreading and lit and indifferent, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately account for, that she was exactly the right size for the life she was standing in. Not too much, not too little. Exactly enough.